June 7, 1942, Pearl Harbor Navy Yard, 0347 hours. Frank Dombrowski's boots hit water, cold, oily, ankle-deep inside a warship that shouldn't exist anymore. He stopped, lifted his welding torch. The flame threw shadows across twisted metal-buckled deck plates, a hole big enough to park a Buick. Jesus Christ. Behind him, his crew chief Murphy spat tobacco into the darkness. 17 men died right where you're standing, Dombrowski. Bomb went through 3 decks before it cooked off. Frank didn't move. The water around his ankles smelled like fuel and something else, something he didn't want to name. How long they give us? Murphy laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. 90 days. That's the official estimate. 90 days. Frank ran his hand along a steel beam bent like a pretzel. We can work with that. No. Murphy stepped closer. His voice dropped. Admiral wants her sailing in 72 hours. Frank turned around. 72 hours. Keep your voice down. That's not repair work, Murphy. That's a magic trick. Murphy grabbed Frank's shoulder, squeezed hard. Then start pulling rabbits out of your ass because 1,400 men are about to do exactly that. And you're one of them. Frank looked back at the destruction. 3 days ago, Japanese bombs had ripped through USS Yorktown at the Battle of Coral Sea. Now she sat in dry dock, gutted, flooded, her guts spilled across multiple decks. And somehow she was supposed to fight again before the week ended. Why? Frank asked. Why the rush? Murphy's jaw tightened. Because the Japs are coming back, somewhere called Midway. And right now, we've got 2 carriers to stop them. He paused. We need 3. Frank stared at the ruined deck. Somewhere above him he heard voices. Hammering. The hiss of cutting torches already at work. 72 hours, he muttered. Clock's already running. Frank gripped his torch tighter. His hands were shaking. Fear exhaustion. Didn't matter. Then let's stop talking. 0600 hours. Day 1. Rear Admiral William Calhoun walked Yorktown's flight deck with 3 engineers struggling to keep pace. His shoes crunched on debris, glass, spent shell casings, a pilot's boot empty. Give me the damage report. Commander Harrison flipped through papers, hands trembling. Sir, the bomb penetration on the starboard side compromised structural integrity across 4 compartments. Electrical systems are destroyed from frame 60 through 92. Fuel lines ruptured in 3 separate... Stop. Calhoun held up his hand. I didn't ask what's broken. I asked what we need to fight. Harrison blinked. Sir, can she steam? The boilers are functional, with repairs. Can she launch aircraft? The flight deck has holes, Admiral. The elevators are... Answer the question. Harrison swallowed. If we patch the deck, get the elevators moving, maybe. Calhoun stared at the horizon. Somewhere out there, 4 Japanese carriers were preparing to attack Midway. Admiral Nimitz had the intelligence. He knew what was coming. 2 American carriers against 4 Japanese. Those odds meant death. 3 against 4 was still bad, but it was a fight. Commander. Calhoun's voice was quiet, calm, terrifying. I want this ship combat ready in 3 days. I don't care about Navy specifications. I don't care about proper procedure. I don't care if you have to weld hull plates with chewing gum and prayers. Sir, that's not... Make her fight. Harrison's clipboard dropped to his side. Yes, sir. Calhoun walked away. His footsteps echoed across the wounded deck. Behind him, Harrison turned to his fellow engineers. You heard the Admiral. Throw out the manual. We're building something new. 1430 hours. Day 1. Frank hadn't eaten since yesterday. His hands were already blistered. Didn't matter. He pressed his welding mask down and struck the arc. Blue-white light erupted. Sparks cascaded like fireworks as he drew a bead along a fresh steel plate, bonding it to Yorktown's torn hull. Beside him, a kid named Patterson, couldn't be more than 19, fumbled with a section of pipe. Hold it steady. Frank growled through the mask. I'm trying. Try harder. That's a fuel line. You screw it up, this whole deck goes up like a Roman candle. Patterson's hands steadied. Barely. Frank finished the weld, lifted his mask. Sweat poured down his face. How long you been at the yard? 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Frank grabbed a drink of water. Lukewarm. Tasted like rust. You ever work on a carrier before? No, sir. You scared? Patterson hesitated, then nodded. Frank handed him the water. Good. Scared keeps you careful. Stupid gets people killed. He picked up his torch. Now hand me that plate. The one with the dent. Yeah, that one. We're gonna make it fit whether it wants to or not. 2200 hours. Day 1. Somewhere on the hangar deck, a radio crackled. Music. The Andrews sisters singing, "Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree." Frank barely heard it. His world had shrunk to steel fire and the next weld. Around him, chaos had become rhythm. Cutting torches sang, hammers rang. Men shouted coordinates, measurements, curses. A symphony of desperate creation. A welder named Kowalski stumbled past, face black with soot. He sat down heavily against a bulkhead. You okay? Frank asked. Burned through my gloves. Kowalski held up his hands. Red. Blistered. Raw. Get to medical. Medical's full. Kowalski laughed weakly. Doc said wrap him and get back to work. He pulled out a roll of gauze. Started wrapping his own hands, wincing with each pass. Frank watched. Then reached into his pocket. Pulled out a flask. Whiskey. Take a shot. Kowalski looked up. Against regs. Everything we're doing is against regs. Frank pressed the flask into his bandaged hands. Drink. Then get back on the line. Kowalski drank, coughed, handed it back. Thanks, Dombrowski. Don't thank me. Thank the Admiral who thinks we can resurrect the dead. 0330 hours. Day 2. Frank's eyes wouldn't focus anymore. He blinked, shook his head. The weld in front of him blurred, split into two, merged back together. Dombrowski. Murphy's voice. When's the last time you slept? I'll sleep when she sails. You'll sleep now. That's an order. Go to hell. Murphy grabbed the torch from his hand. You're gonna weld your own arm to the hull, you keep going like this. 30 minutes. Rack out. Frank wanted to argue. His body wouldn't let him. He slumped against the bulkhead, slid down until he sat in the same oily water he'd been standing in for 18 hours. He closed his eyes, dreamed of fire. 1100 hours. Day 2. Patterson shook him awake. Dombrowski. Dombrowski. Frank jolted up, heart pounding. What? What's wrong? Admiral Nimitz is here. What? The fleet admiral. On the ship. Right now. Frank struggled to his feet. His whole body ached. His hands throbbed. He followed Patterson up a ladder through a maze of cables and welding equipment until they reached the hangar deck. Admiral Chester Nimitz stood in the middle of organized chaos. He wore no expression Frank could read. His uniform was immaculate amid the filth and smoke. He said nothing, just walked, watched, listened. A group of welders stopped their work, stood at attention. Nimitz waved them down. Keep working. Don't stop on my account. He walked closer, stopped beside Frank's crew. For a long moment he just looked at them. Soot-covered faces, burned hands, eyes red from smoke and exhaustion. How long have you men been at this? Murphy answered. Since she docked, sir. 36 hours, give or take. Nimitz nodded slowly. Do you know why this matters? Do you know what you're doing? Silence. You're not just fixing a ship. Nimitz's voice was barely above a whisper. You're giving us a chance, a fighting chance. Every hour you work, every plate you weld, you're buying lives, pilot lives, sailor lives, maybe the whole Pacific. He looked at Frank, held his gaze. "What's your name, son?" "Dombrowski, sir. Frank Dombrowski." "Where you from, Frank?" "Pittsburgh, sir. Steel mills." Nimitz almost smiled. "Steel man. Good." He put his hand on Frank's shoulder. "America is watching, Frank, even if they don't know it yet." He turned and walked away. Frank stared after him. His throat felt tight. Murphy cleared his throat. "Well, you heard the Admiral. Back to work." Frank picked up his torch. His hands weren't shaking anymore. 12 hours. Day 3. "Try it now." Chief Engineer Morrison stood at the engine control station. His finger hovered over the ignition. 72 hours of sleepless work came down to this moment. He pressed the button. Nothing. "Come on," Morrison whispered. "Come on, you beautiful bastard." A cough. A shudder. The deck vibrated. Then, roar. Yorktown's engines turned over. Not smooth, not pretty, but alive. The sound echoed through the entire ship. Men stopped working, looked up, someone cheered, then everyone was cheering. Frank stood on the hangar deck torch, still in hand, and felt tears streaming down his face. He didn't wipe them away. Neither did anyone else. "She's alive," Patterson whispered beside him. "My God, she's alive." Frank nodded. Couldn't speak. Yorktown was sailing. 1,400 hours. Day 3. The carrier moved through Pearl Harbor's channel, heading for open ocean. On the pier, Frank stood with his crew. They were destroyed. Burned hands. Bloodshot eyes. Clothes that would never be clean again. They watched Yorktown grow smaller against the horizon. Murphy spoke first. "Think she'll hold together." Frank thought about the patches, the shortcuts, the prayers welded into every seam. "She'll hold." "How do you know?" Frank didn't answer. He just watched until the ship disappeared. 72 hours ago, Japanese admirals had celebrated. They believed American carriers were finished. They believed time was on their side. They were about to learn how wrong they were. What the Japanese didn't know. In 3 weeks, those impossible repairs would help sink 4 Japanese carriers at Midway. In 3 months, American shipyards would perform the same miracle again and again. In 1 year, the United States would launch more carriers than Japan had ever built. The Japanese called Yorktown a ghost. They were wrong. She wasn't a ghost. She was a warning. But Yorktown's resurrection was only the beginning. The real terror for Japanese admirals wasn't the ships that came back from the dead. It was the ships that hadn't even been born yet. In Part 2, we will watch American industry do something that Japanese planners believed was mathematically impossible. We will see the Essex-class carriers arrive. We will witness Japanese admirals slowly realize they aren't fighting a navy. They're fighting a factory. And factories don't sleep. 72 hours. 1,400 men. One impossible deadline. In Part 1, we watched Frank Dombrowski and the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard bring USS Yorktown back from the dead. Japanese admirals had calculated 90 days for repairs. American welders did it in 3. That miracle helped win Midway. 4 Japanese carriers burned. The tide of the Pacific War shifted. But here's what the history books don't tell you. Yorktown's resurrection wasn't the hard part. The hard part was convincing America to do it again, and again, and again. Until the Pacific Ocean filled with more carriers than Japan could count. Because in the summer of 1942, one man stood in the way. A man who believed the old rules still applied. A man who thought quality mattered more than speed. His name was Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet. And he was about to learn that in total war, the old rules are dead. July 15, 1942, Washington, D.C., Navy Department Building. Henry Kaiser had never worn a uniform. He was 60 years old. Built dams, built roads, built ships for the Maritime Commission, never served a day in the military. Now he sat in a waiting room outside Admiral King's office, holding a folder full of numbers that would change the war. His assistant Clay Bedford checked his watch. "We've been waiting 3 hours." "He's making a point." "What point?" Kaiser smiled. Not kindly. "That I'm a civilian. That I don't belong here. That shipbuilding is Navy business." The door opened. A lieutenant stepped out. "Mr. Kaiser, the Admiral will see you now." Kaiser stood, straightened his tie. "Watch and learn, Clay. This is where we find out if America wants to win." Admiral Ernest King sat behind a desk covered in reports. He didn't stand when Kaiser entered, didn't offer his hand, didn't smile. "Mr. Kaiser." His voice could freeze salt water. "You've requested this meeting 3 times. I've declined twice. You're here now because the President insisted, so speak quickly." Kaiser sat without being invited. "Admiral, I can build you 50 escort carriers in 12 months. King's expression didn't change. "The Navy builds carriers, Mr. Kaiser. We've been building them for 20 years. We know how." "With respect, Admiral, you build fleet carriers. 2 years per ship. 3,000 workers. Beautiful vessels." Kaiser leaned forward. "I'm talking about something different. Smaller. Simpler. Built on cargo ship hulls. Mass-produced like automobiles. Escort carriers." King's tone made it sound like a disease. "Thin armor. Small air groups. Insufficient speed. But available, Admiral. Available when you need them. Not 2 years from now. Now." King stood, walked to his window. The Washington Monument gleamed in summer haze. "Mr. Kaiser, do you know how many sailors died at Midway because of rushed repairs? Do you know how many aircraft we lost because carriers weren't properly equipped? Do you know how many will die waiting for perfect carriers that arrive too late?" Silence. King turned. His eyes were cold. "I've read your proposal. Cargo ship hulls. Merchant marine standards. Welded construction instead of riveted. You want to build warships like you build Liberty ships." "I built 1 Liberty ship in 4 days, Admiral. 4 days. And half of them cracked in heavy seas." Kaiser didn't flinch. "We fixed that. New welding techniques. Better steel. The ships hold together. In the Atlantic. Calm waters, short runs." King walked closer. "The Pacific is different, Mr. Kaiser. Typhoons, combat damage, extended deployments. Your cargo ship carriers will break apart." "Then let me prove they won't." King laughed. It wasn't pleasant. "You want me to risk sailors' lives on your experiment?" "I want you to risk sailors' lives on hope, Admiral, because right now you're losing them to certainty." The room went quiet. Kaiser opened his folder. Spread photographs across King's desk. Aerial shots, ship silhouettes. "These are Japanese carriers, Admiral. 12 confirmed operational. Plus aircraft from island bases across the Pacific. You have 4 fleet carriers. 4. Saratoga's in repair. Enterprise is damaged. You're outnumbered 3-1. I'm aware of our situation. Are you aware that Japanese shipyards are building more? That by 1943 they'll have 20 carriers to our 6. Kaiser tapped the photographs. "You can't win a war of attrition when you're losing the attrition." King gathered the photographs, stacked them neatly. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Give me 1 hull, 1 chance. I'll build an escort carrier in 90 days. If she fails inspection, I'll pay for the loss myself. If she passes..." Kaiser paused. "You give me a contract for 50 more." King stared at him for a long moment. 90 days. 90 days. The Navy's fastest carrier construction is 14 months. The Navy isn't Henry Kaiser. Another silence. Then King pressed a button on his desk. "Lieutenant, get me Admiral Cochrane. Tell him I need to discuss something insane with him." Kaiser almost smiled. Almost. But convincing King was only the first battle. The real war was about to begin on the shipyard floor. August 3rd, 1942. Kaiser Shipyard, Vancouver, Washington. The hull of a cargo ship sat in dry dock. C3 class freighter design. 350 feet long. Flat deck. Simple lines. Within 90 days, she would become USS Casablanca, the first of a new breed. Or she would become Henry Kaiser's most expensive failure. Edgar Wallace had worked Navy shipyards for 22 years, riveter, foreman, now senior construction supervisor. He knew how carriers were supposed to be built. This wasn't it. "You want me to weld the flight deck supports?" He stared at the blueprints like they were written in Chinese. "Flight decks are riveted, always have been. Rivets flex with the ship, welds crack." Kaiser's chief engineer, John Reese, shook his head. "New technique, continuous bead welding. Stronger than rivets, faster than rivets." Says who? Says the metallurgists at Bethlehem Steel. Says the engineers at MIT. Says me. Wallace threw the blueprints on the table. "You're gonna get men killed. When that deck cracks in combat, when planes slide into the ocean, when—" "Mr. Wallace." Reese stepped closer. "Do you know how long it takes to rivet a flight deck? 3 months, give or take. We have 90 days to build the entire ship. Flight deck, engine room, aircraft elevator, everything." Reese picked up the blueprints. "We're welding. Learn the technique or find another job." Wallace looked around the shipyard. Hundreds of workers, many of them women housewives and school teachers who'd never touched a welding torch 6 months ago. "These people don't know what they're doing." "Then teach them. That's your job." Reese handed him the blueprints. "First shift starts in 6 hours. I suggest you start reading." August 28, 1942, day 25. The hull was taking shape. Wallace had to admit the welding was faster. Teams worked around the clock, 3 shifts, 24 hours. The shipyard never went dark, never went quiet. But something was wrong. He found the crack at 300. Starboard side frame 47, a hairline fracture running along a weld seam, 6 inches long, growing. His stomach dropped. "Reese?" He found the engineer in the control office, buried in production reports. "We've got a problem." Reese looked at the photograph Wallace handed him. His face went pale. "How bad?" "Bad enough to fail inspection. Bad enough to prove Admiral King right." Reese grabbed his coat. "Show me." They stood in the dry dock, flashlights illuminating the crack. Around them, the night shift worked on, unaware. "This is what I warned you about." Wallace's voice was tired. Not angry, just tired. "Welds don't flex. Ship moves, weld cracks. Simple physics." Reese ran his finger along the fracture. Thinking. "When did this happen?" "Sometime in the last 48 hours. Temperature dropped 15 degrees Tuesday night. Steel contracted." "Temperature differential." Reese nodded slowly. "The weld cooled faster than the surrounding metal. Created stress." "Exactly. It's happening all over the ship, Reese. We just haven't found the other cracks yet." Silence. The sounds of welding torches and shouting workers filled the night. Then Reese smiled. Wallace stared at him. "What the hell is funny about this?" "Nothing's funny. But I know how to fix it." "You can't fix metallurgy." "No, but I can change the welding process." Reese pulled out a notebook, started sketching. "We preheat the steel before welding. Slow cool after. Reduces thermal stress. Prevents cracking. That'll add time. Time we don't have. Not if we add heaters to every welding station. Run them continuously. Keep the temperature constant across the entire work surface." Wallace looked at the sketch. Simple, elegant, maybe crazy enough to work. "You're making this up as you go along, aren't you?" Reese grinned. "That's how you build something that's never been built before." If this fix failed, 90 days of work would become 90 days of scrap metal. But Henry Kaiser had bet his reputation on something bigger than any single ship. September 2nd, 1942, day 30. The Navy inspection team arrived without warning. Commander Theodore Mitchell led 5 officers through the shipyard clipboards, ready, expectations low. They'd been sent to document failure. Everyone in Washington expected it. Kaiser met them at the gate. "Commander, welcome to the future of American shipbuilding." Mitchell didn't smile. "Let's see if you have a present first, Mr. Kaiser." They walked the hull for 4 hours. Measured welds, tested steel thickness, examined every joint, every seam, every plate. Wallace followed behind, sweating despite the cool September air. Finally, Mitchell stopped at frame 47, exactly where the crack had been. He ran his hand along the weld, pulled out a magnifying glass, examined the seam for a long, silent minute. This was repaired. Wallace's heart stopped. "Yes." Reese stepped forward. "We identified a thermal stress fracture during construction, implemented a new preheating protocol. The repair is stronger than the original." Mitchell looked at him. "You found a problem and fixed it?" "Yes, sir." "Before we found it?" "Yes, sir." Mitchell made a note on his clipboard. Wallace couldn't read his expression. "Continue the tour." October 31st, 1942, day 89. The sun rose over Vancouver. USS Casablanca sat in the water for the first time. Complete. Armed. Ready. 89 days. 1 day ahead of schedule. Kaiser stood on the dock with Admiral King, the same admiral who had called his plan insane 3 months earlier. "Well?" Kaiser asked. King watched the escort carrier shift gently in her berth. Small, yes. Simple, yes. But real. "She passed inspection." "She did." "Your welding techniques worked." "They did." "You built a carrier in 90 days. 89, actually." King turned to face him. For the first time, something like respect crossed his features. "How many can you build?" Kaiser pulled out a contract. 50 Casablanca-class carriers, 12 months. We launch 1 every week once we hit full production. 1 per week. 1 per week. King took the contract, read it slowly, then pulled out a pen. "Mr. Kaiser, I believe I owe you an apology." "You owe me a signature, Admiral. Save the apology for the Japanese." King signed. But building ships was only half the battle. Somewhere in the Pacific, Japanese admirals were about to discover that America had learned a new way of war. The problem was Japan was learning too. November 1942. Solomon Islands. The first Casablanca-class carriers entered combat. Smaller than fleet carriers. Slower. Fewer aircraft. But they came in numbers. Where Japan deployed 1 carrier, America now deployed 3. Where Japan lost a ship and mourned for months, America lost a ship and launched another. Japanese intelligence officers in Tokyo noticed the change immediately. Commander Toshikazu Ome spread reconnaissance photographs across his desk. American task forces. More ships than last month. More ships than should exist. "This is impossible." His aide leaned closer. "Sir, we sank 2 American carriers in October. 2. Ome tapped the photographs. "Yet they have more carriers now than before we sank them." "Perhaps they transferred ships from the Atlantic." "No, these silhouettes are wrong. Too small for Essex class. Too different for Yorktown class." Ome picked up 1 photograph, examined it under magnifying glass. "These are new ships. Ships we've never seen before. New construction. Impossible. The Americans cannot build carriers that quickly." But the photographs didn't lie, and neither did the casualty reports. Japanese pilot losses in November exceeded October by 40%. More American aircraft, more American carriers, more targets, more danger. Admiral Yamamoto received the intelligence summary on his flagship. He read it twice, then set it down carefully. "They're building faster than we can sink them." His chief of staff nodded. "It appears so, sir. This changes everything." "Yes, sir." Yamamoto walked to his window. The Pacific stretched endlessly before him. We planned for a war of attrition. Bleed them slowly. Force a negotiated peace. He shook his head. But you cannot win attrition against an enemy who replaces losses faster than you inflict them. What do we do, sir? Yamamoto was silent for a long moment. We find out how they're doing it, then we stop them. Cliffhanger. By December 1942, Kaiser shipyards were launching one escort carrier every 7 days. By spring 1943, the Essex-class fleet carriers joined them. Bigger, faster, deadlier. The Pacific was filling with American steel, but the Japanese weren't blind, they weren't stupid, and they weren't giving up. In Part 3, we will watch Japan launch its most desperate counterstrike. Kamikaze pilots, suicide submarines, weapons designed not to win, but to make victory too expensive. We will see American carriers burn again. We will see damage control teams pushed beyond human limits. We will watch men choose between saving their ship and saving themselves. And we will discover the terrible truth about industrial warfare. Building ships is easy. Watching them die is something else entirely. The numbers game has begun, but numbers don't bleed. Men do. Part 1. Frank Dombrowski and 1,400 workers rebuilt USS Yorktown in 72 hours. A 90-day job compressed into 3 days of sleepless labor. That miracle helped win Midway. Part 2. Henry Kaiser convinced Admiral King to let him build escort carriers on cargo ship hulls. 90 days per carrier. Then, 1 per week. The Pacific began filling with American steel. Japanese admirals watched the numbers change. They counted carriers, recounted them. The math made no sense. By late 1942, America had more flight decks than Japan could track. But here's what the Japanese understood that Americans sometimes forgot. Numbers alone don't win wars. Men do. And Japan was about to test exactly how many American men were willing to die. In the waters around the Philippine Islands, a new word entered the lexicon of naval warfare. Kamikaze. Divine wind. The wind that would try to sweep American carriers from the sea forever. October 1944. Combined Fleet Headquarters, Japan. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi stood before a room of young pilots. None of them were older than 23. Most were 19. 20. Children with wings. I am going to ask you to do something terrible. Onishi's voice was steady. His hands were not. I am going to ask you to become weapons. The pilots sat in silence. They knew what was coming. Everyone knew. The Americans build ships faster than we can sink them. Their factories produce aircraft faster than we can shoot them down. Their pilots. Onishi paused. Their pilots survive battles and return. Ours do not. He walked among them, looking at faces, memorizing them. We cannot match their production. We cannot match their technology. But we can match their determination. He stopped. We can exceed it. A young pilot named Yukio Seki raised his hand. Admiral, what are you asking us to do? Onishi met his eyes. Crash your aircraft into American carriers, loaded with bombs, at full speed. Silence. You will not survive. There is no plan for survival. You will die. Onishi's voice cracked. But your death will mean something. 1 pilot, 1 plane, 1 carrier destroyed. Seki stood slowly. His face showed nothing. When do we begin? The Japanese had found America's weakness. Ships could be replaced. Factories could build forever. But watching friends die, that was something else entirely. October 25, 1944. Battle of Leyte Gulf. The first kamikaze attack came at dawn. Lieutenant William Selman stood on the bridge of USS St. Lo, a Casablanca-class escort carrier. One of Kaiser's ships. Number 13 off the assembly line. He saw the Japanese Zero diving from 12,000 feet. He's not pulling up. The words left his mouth slowly, like a dream. He's not pulling up. The Zero hit St. Lo's flight deck at 300 miles per hour. The bomb it carried punched through to the hangar deck, then detonated. Secondary explosions followed. Ammunition, fuel, aircraft loaded for the morning strike. St. Lo broke apart in 30 minutes. 143 men died. Selman survived, pulled from the water by a destroyer, burns across 40% of his body. 3 days later, still bandaged, he stood before his commanding officer. "Sir, request permission to return to duty." "Lieutenant, you can barely stand." "I can stand well enough." Selman's voice was hollow. "They killed my ship, sir. They killed my friends. I want back in this fight." He got his wish. So did the kamikazes. November 1944. Damage reports flooded Pearl Harbor. Admiral Nimitz read them in his office. Page after page. USS Intrepid. Hit. Fires controlled. 70 dead. USS Franklin. Hit twice. Hit. 200 wounded. Still operational. USS Belleau Wood. Hit. Flight deck destroyed. Under tow. The numbers kept climbing. In 1 month, kamikaze attacks damaged 23 American carriers, sunk 2 outright, killed over 1,000 sailors. Captain James Shaw burst into Nimitz's office. "Sir, the men are starting to crack." "Explain." "Combat fatigue, refusing duty. One gunner on Lexington shot himself rather than face another attack." Shaw threw a folder on the desk. "Medical is overwhelmed. We're seeing psychological casualties we've never documented before." Nimitz set down his pen. "And the kamikazes? They keep coming. Our fighters can't stop them all. They dive through anti-aircraft fire like it doesn't exist. Because to them..." Shaw's voice trailed off. "It doesn't." Nimitz finished. "They're already dead. They just haven't landed yet." This wasn't about ships anymore. This was about souls. And America was bleeding both. November 15th, 1944, USS Enterprise. Damage Control Officer. Lieutenant Commander Herschel Smith stood in the Combat Information Center. Enterprise had been hit 3 times in the past month. Each time his teams brought her back. Each time more men died doing it. Radar contact. Bearing 270. Multiple bogeys. Altitude 8,000 descending. Smith closed his eyes. Here we go again. How many? 15. No. 20. Sir, they're splitting up. General quarters. All hands to battle stations. The ship came alive. Men running. Guns swiveling. The smell of fear mixing with gun oil and salt air. Smith grabbed the intercom. "Damage control parties, this is the DCO. I know you're tired. I know you're scared. But we've beaten them before. We'll beat them again." Static. Then a voice, young, probably 18. "We're ready, sir." Smith nodded to no one. "Good. Now let's earn our pay." The first kamikaze came in low, skimming the waves, trying to avoid radar. Enterprise's gunners found him anyway. Tracers arced across the water. The Zero exploded 200 yards out. Debris scattered across the flight deck. 1 down. But there were 19 more. The second Zero dove from above, straight down, a screaming vertical drop that made targeting nearly impossible. Anti-aircraft fire ripped through his wings. Didn't matter. He kept coming. The impact shook the entire ship. Smith felt the deck buckle beneath his feet. Alarms screamed. Smoke poured through ventilation ducts. Damage report. Hit on the forward elevator fire in Hangar Bay, 2. Multiple casualties. Smith grabbed his helmet. "I'm heading down. Keep those guns firing." He ran through corridors filling with smoke. Past wounded men being carried the opposite direction. Through a hatch that was already hot to the touch. The hangar bay was an inferno. Aviation fuel burned across the deck. An F-6F Hellcat sat crushed under fallen debris, its fuel tank ruptured. 2 sailors were trying to push it overboard before it exploded. "Get clear," Smith shouted. "Use the foam." "Foam's out. The lines are severed." Smith looked around, counted seconds in his head. The fuel would reach the bomb storage in maybe 3 minutes. If that happened, Enterprise would break in half. "Find me a cutting torch. Now!" A petty officer appeared with the equipment. Smith grabbed it, lit the flame. "What are you doing, sir?" "Cutting the fuel line. If we stop the flow, fire burns out." "Sir, that's inside the fire." "I noticed." Smith pulled on his gloves. "Keep everyone back. If this goes wrong, get to the fantail." He walked into the flames. The heat was beyond anything he'd experienced. His clothes began smoking, his skin blistered. But he found the fuel line, found the section that was still intact. He cut. The line severed. Fuel stopped flowing. The fire began to shrink. Smith walked back out. His uniform was destroyed. His hands were burned black. But Enterprise was alive. "Get those pumps working," he said. Then he collapsed. That night, Smith received the Navy Cross. He refused to attend the ceremony. "Give it to the dead," he said. "They earned it more than me." December 1944. The numbers told a story. Japanese kamikaze attacks had hit 47 American ships in 2 months. Killed over 2,000 sailors, wounded 5,000 more. But they hadn't stopped the fleet. For every carrier damaged, 3 more arrived from Kaiser's shipyards. For every pilot killed, 2 more graduated from American flight schools. For every ship lost, the Pacific grew more crowded with American steel. Admiral Onishi received the statistics in his headquarters. 47 hits. 4 ships sunk. 4. Out of hundreds. He had sent nearly 500 pilots to their deaths. 500 young men who would never come home, never marry, never have children. And the American carriers kept coming. "It's not enough." His aide spoke quietly. "We're killing ourselves faster than we're killing them." Onishi said nothing. What could he say? The mathematics of industrial warfare had no mercy. Japan could trade 1 pilot for 1 ship, and it still wouldn't be enough. America would simply build more ships, train more crews, send more aircraft. The divine wind was blowing. But it was blowing against a hurricane. January 1945. USS Ticonderoga. Lieutenant William Selman stood on the flight deck. His burns had healed. Mostly. The scars would never fade. Neither would the memories of St. Lo breaking apart beneath him. A 0 appeared on the horizon. Then 2 more. Then 10. Selman watched them come. No fear this time. Just cold hard focus. "All gunners, this is the DCO. Pick your targets. Controlled bursts. Make every round count." The guns opened fire. Selman watched 3 Zeros disintegrate before they reached 500 yards. 2 more went into the water. 1 broke off trailing smoke. 4 made it through. The first hit the water 50 feet from the hull. The second struck the island superstructure. The third exploded against the armored flight deck, doing minimal damage. The fourth never arrived. An F-6F Hellcat pilot named James Patterson rammed it in midair. Both planes vanished in a fireball. Patterson had time for 1 radio transmission. "Tell my mom I love her." Then silence. Ticonderoga survived. Patterson didn't. That night, Selman wrote a letter to Patterson's mother. He didn't know what to say. He tried anyway. "Your son saved 3,000 lives today. He did it because that's who he was. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But you should know that he died a hero. The truest kind." By February 1945, the kamikaze campaign had failed. Not because Japan ran out of pilots. They didn't. Not because America developed better defenses. They helped. It failed because of mathematics. Japan sent 2 800 kamikaze pilots to their deaths between October 1944 and August 1945. They sank 34 American ships, damaged 368 others. But during that same period, American shipyards launched 122 new aircraft carriers, over 100 new escort carriers, thousands of support ships. The kamikazes killed approximately 4,900 American sailors. The carriers they were trying to stop helped kill over 2 million Japanese military personnel. For every American ship sunk, Japan lost something that couldn't be replaced: time. And time belonged to America. Cliffhanger. By spring 1945, the Pacific was an American lake. Carriers stretched from horizon to horizon. Aircraft darkened the skies. The Japanese home islands lay within striking distance. The war was ending. Everyone knew it. The only question was how many more would die before the finish. But this story isn't finished yet, because there's a question we haven't answered. What happened to the men who made this possible? Frank Dombrowski, who rebuilt Yorktown in 72 hours. Henry Kaiser, who built carriers like automobiles. Herschel Smith, who walked into fire to save his ship. What happened to them when the war ended? What happened when the factories went silent? What happened when America no longer needed miracles? In Part 4, we'll discover the answer. Some stories end in victory. Some end in tragedy. This one ends in something more complicated. Truth. Part 1. Frank Dombrowski and 1,400 shipyard workers rebuilt USS Yorktown in 72 hours. They turned a 90-day repair job into a 3-day miracle. That miracle helped sink 4 Japanese carriers at Midway. Part 2. Henry Kaiser convinced the Navy to let him build escort carriers on cargo ship hulls. 1 carrier per week. The Pacific filled with American steel faster than Japan could count. Part 3. Japan answered with kamikazes. Divine wind. Young pilots turned into human missiles. They killed thousands of American sailors. But they couldn't stop the tide. For every ship they sank, 3 more arrived. The war ended in August 1945. Japan surrendered. The greatest conflict in human history was over. But this story isn't. Because there's a question we haven't answered. What happened to the men who made this possible? What happened when the factories went silent? What happened when America no longer needed miracles? The answer is more complicated than you might expect. Some were celebrated, some were forgotten, and some discovered that winning a war was easier than surviving the peace. September 1945. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Frank Dombrowski came home on a Tuesday. No parade, no ceremony. Just a Greyhound bus dropping him at the corner of 5th and Liberty, same spot he'd left 4 years earlier. He was 41 years old. His hands were scarred from burns that never fully healed. His hearing was damaged from years of shipyard noise. He walked with a slight limp from an accident in '44 when a steel plate fell and crushed 3 toes. His wife Margaret met him at the door. She didn't speak, just held him. Their son Tommy, now 8 years old, stood in the hallway. He'd been 4 when Frank left. He didn't recognize his own father. "Hey, sport." Frank knelt down. "Remember me?" Tommy shook his head. Frank's smile faltered. Just for a moment. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a wooden model aircraft carrier. He'd carved it himself during the long voyage home. "That's okay. We've got time to fix that." 3 weeks later, Frank returned to the steel mills. Same job, same pay, same 12-hour shifts he'd worked before the war. No one asked about Yorktown. No one asked about the 72 hours that helped turn the Pacific War. To his co-workers, Frank was just another veteran, one of 16 million Americans who'd served. One evening, Margaret found him sitting in the backyard, staring at nothing. "Frank, you okay?" He didn't answer for a long moment. "I keep thinking about the boys who didn't come back, the ones who died on ships I helped build." He looked at his scarred hands. "Was it worth it, Maggie? All of it?" She sat beside him, took his hand. "You built ships that won a war. You helped bring boys home to their families. You did something that mattered. Then why do I feel so empty?" Margaret had no answer. Neither did Frank. He worked at the steel mill for another 23 years. Retired in 1968. Died in 1977, aged 73. His obituary mentioned his service at Pearl Harbor Navy Yard. 2 sentences. That was all. The Yorktown miracle wasn't mentioned. Most of the 1,400 workers who performed that miracle were never identified. They left no memoirs, gave no interviews. They simply returned to their lives and grew old and died, taking their stories with them. But Frank's anonymity was a choice. Henry Kaiser's fate was different. He couldn't escape fame, even if he wanted to. 1946. Oakland, California. Henry Kaiser stood in an empty shipyard, the same shipyard that had launched one carrier per week during the war, the same yard that had employed 40,000 workers at its peak. Now it employed 300. Skeleton crew, maintenance only. The contracts had ended. The government didn't need escort carriers anymore. The workers had been laid off, sent home, scattered across America like leaves in autumn wind. Kaiser walked the silent docks, remembering. His assistant Clay Bedford caught up to him. "Sir, the investors are waiting." "Let them wait." Kaiser picked up a rusted bolt from the ground, turned it over in his fingers. "Do you know how many ships we built here, Clay?" 1,490, sir. More than any shipyard in history." "And how many men worked here, Mom?" 300,000 across all shifts and facilities." Kaiser nodded. 300,000 people who learned that impossible was just a word, that deadlines were suggestions, that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. He dropped the bolt. Where do they go now? What do they do with that knowledge? Bedford had no answer. Kaiser did. Within 2 years, he'd pivoted to automobiles, healthcare, aluminum, cement. Kaiser Permanente, Kaiser Aluminum, Kaiser Steel. He took the lessons of wartime production and applied them to peacetime industry. When he died in 1967, Henry Kaiser was worth billions. His companies employed hundreds of thousands. His healthcare system covered millions. But he never forgot the shipyards. In his final interview, a reporter asked what he was most proud of. Kaiser didn't mention the money, didn't mention the companies, didn't mention the fame. "The carriers," he said. "Those little escort carriers that everyone said couldn't be built. We built 150 of them. They helped win the war." He smiled. Everything else was just keeping busy. But the real legacy wasn't in the men. It was in what they proved. And that proof changed everything that came after. The numbers tell a story. During World War II, American shipyards built 771 naval vessels, 151 aircraft carriers of various classes, 299 destroyers, 203 submarines. No nation in history had ever produced weapons at this scale. No nation has matched it since. The average time to build a Liberty cargo ship dropped from 244 days in 1941 to 42 days in 1944. Kaiser's yard once built one in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. These weren't just statistics. They were proof of a concept that would reshape military thinking for generations. The concept was simple: quantity has a quality of its own. Japan built carriers like master craftsmen building temples, each one unique, each one irreplaceable. America built carriers like Ford built automobiles. Standardized parts, assembly line methods, speed over perfection. The Japanese approach produced beautiful ships. The American approach produced victory. After the war, every major navy on Earth studied this lesson. The Soviet Union built nuclear submarines using similar mass production techniques. China's modern naval expansion follows the same principles. Even Japan, rebuilding its maritime self-defense force, adopted American methods. The escort carriers themselves evolved. The concept of small, cheap, numerous flight decks led directly to modern amphibious assault ships. The USS America, commissioned in 2014, carries more aviation capability than most nations' entire air forces. It exists because Henry Kaiser proved that carriers could be built fast, cheap, and effective. The welding techniques pioneered at Pearl Harbor Navy Yard spread throughout the industry. Today, every ship in the United States Navy is welded, not riveted. The methods Frank Dombrowski used in 1942 are still taught at shipbuilding schools. Damage control procedures developed during the carrier battles became doctrine. The obsessive focus on firefighting, flooding control, and rapid repair saved countless ships in Korea, Vietnam, and every conflict since. When USS Cole was bombed by terrorists in 2000, her crew used damage control techniques descended directly from World War II carrier warfare. They saved their ship. 17 sailors died, but 279 survived. But the deepest legacy isn't technical, it's philosophical, and it applies far beyond military shipbuilding. What did World War II prove about innovation? First, the best ideas often come from outsiders. Frank Dombrowski wasn't a naval architect. Henry Kaiser had never built a warship. Neither man was supposed to revolutionize carrier construction. They did anyway. Second, bureaucracies resist change, even when change is necessary. Admiral King rejected Kaiser's proposals twice. The Navy insisted on riveted construction long after welding proved superior. Institutions protect their assumptions more than they pursue their missions. Third, speed beats perfection in crisis. An adequate ship today is worth more than a perfect ship next year. This principle applies to business, to medicine, to any field where timing matters. Fourth, ordinary people, given extraordinary circumstances, achieve extraordinary things. The 1,400 workers who rebuilt Yorktown weren't heroes when they started. They became heroes through action. These lessons have been learned and forgotten, and learned again throughout history. The Manhattan Project followed the same pattern. Outsiders with impossible deadlines achieving unimaginable results. The Apollo program followed it too. Young engineers building spacecraft that no one believed possible on schedules that no one believed achievable. Silicon Valley follows it today. Move fast and break things. Ship early and iterate. The language is different. The principle is identical. Every generation discovers that the line between impossible and inevitable is thinner than anyone expects. And there's one more thing, something most people don't know, a detail that makes this story complete. 2019, National Archives, Washington, D.C. A historian named David Chen was researching Midway for a documentary project. Standard work, well-documented battle, nothing new expected. Then he found a folder that had been misfiled for 74 years. Inside was a memorandum from Admiral Chester Nimitz to Chief of Naval Operations Ernest King. Dated June 28, 1942. 3 weeks after Midway. The memo discussed lessons learned from the battle. Aircraft tactics. Intelligence procedures. Fleet communications. But one paragraph stood out. The performance of Pearl Harbor Navy Yard in returning Yorktown to combat readiness exceeded all expectations and may have been decisive in the battle's outcome. Recommend commendation for Rear Admiral Calhoun and senior staff. Additionally, request investigation into applying similar emergency repair protocols fleet-wide. Attached to the memo was a list of names, 1,400 names. Every civilian worker who had participated in Yorktown's 72-hour resurrection. Frank Dombrowski's name was there. Third page, entry 847. The commendations were never issued. The list was filed and forgotten. The war moved too fast. By the time anyone remembered, the workers had scattered. But Nimitz knew. He knew that 1,400 ordinary Americans had done something extraordinary. He knew their names. He wanted them recognized. 74 years later, David Chen published the list online. Descendants of those workers began finding their family members. Sons and daughters and grandchildren discovered that their fathers and grandfathers had been part of something historic. Frank Dombrowski's granddaughter, Sarah Mitchell, learned about her grandfather's role in 2020. He had been dead for 43 years. He had never mentioned Yorktown. Never mentioned the Navy Cross recommendations that were never issued. Never mentioned that Chester Nimitz himself had tried to honor his work. He just told us he built ships, Sarah said in an interview. That's all he ever said. He built ships. She found his wooden model carrier in a box in her mother's attic. The one he'd carved on the voyage home. The one he'd given to his son Tommy, who didn't recognize him. She keeps it on her desk now. Conclusion. So what does this story mean? It means that 72 hours can change history. That one shipyard worker with burned hands can matter as much as any admiral. That 1,400 names on a forgotten list deserve to be remembered. From December 1941 to August 1945, American shipyards built more aircraft carriers than all other nations in history combined. They launched ships faster than the enemy could sink them. They turned the Pacific Ocean from a Japanese lake into an American highway. And they did it with ordinary people. Welders from Pittsburgh, factory workers from Detroit, housewives from California who'd never held a tool before the war started. People who were told their jobs were impossible, their deadlines insane, their methods forbidden. They did it anyway. Frank Dombrowski never got his medal. Henry Kaiser never got a statue. The 1,400 workers of Pearl Harbor Navy Yard never got a parade. But they got something better. They got victory. They got to come home to families who needed them. They got to grow old in a country that was still free. They got to tell their grandchildren, or not tell them, about a time when they did something that mattered. 2,403 Americans died at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. 405,000 Americans died in World War II. Millions more would have died if the war had lasted longer. Every ship built faster was lives saved. Every carrier launched was suffering prevented. Every weld made in those exhausted, desperate, impossible hours was a vote for survival. The Japanese admirals, who couldn't believe how fast American carriers reappeared after Midway, learned something that day. They learned that America doesn't fight with what it has. America fights with what it can become. And what America became in those dark years was something no enemy could defeat. Not because Americans were braver, not because Americans were smarter, but because Americans believed down to their bones that there was no such thing as impossible, only problems that hadn't been solved yet. If you know a story like this one, a story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, share it in the comments. These stories deserve to be told. And if you want to hear more forgotten histories of World War II, there are hundreds more waiting to be discovered. Because the war wasn't won by generals and admirals alone. It was won by welders, by machinists, by women and men whose names never made the history books. It was won by people like Frank Dombrowski, standing ankle-deep in oily water at 3 in the morning, deciding that 72 hours was enough time to save the world. That's the lesson. That's the legacy. That's the truth Japan never understood until it was too late. When ordinary people decide that impossible is just a word, nothing can stand against them. Nothing.